We're filming today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive in the Catskills, and I am extremely pleased to have trumpeter and veteran musician Bobby Johnson Jr. with me.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
You've just been telling me some fascinating things, and we'll have to tell them again.
Let me come.
Yep.
Huh?
But you grew up in Pensacola, Florida?
That's right.
It seems to me I've heard about some other fine musicians who came out of that high school.
Oh, sure.
Yeah?
About, I would say, roughly about 10. For a small town like that, if I may name some. The concert pianist, Don Shirley, Junior Cook, famous jazz saxophone, and G.G. Grice, one of the founders of bebop.
Yeah.
Well, myself. Then we've had a bunch of musicians, white musicians. One was Tony Bruno, famous trumpet player. He came out of Pensacola. And then we had Ray Brown was born there. Ray Brown, famous bass players. So I would say about 10. And one of the, I'll never be able to reason why, because people, during the time I was a kid, people didn't have a place to go. The only place to go was like Sunday night dances. And Pensacola was one of the few towns on the Gulf Coast that had dances, big bands, like on Sunday night. And it somehow got around that they had two east side, like any other small town. They had east side and a west side, and one more side of the town was more sedate than the other, and they had 2 or 3 different bands. But the bands from New Orleans, like Pop Celestine, Don Albert's a great band from Houston, Texas, from New Orleans. And most all of the bands from around New Orleans, they paid a visit on Sunday night. Now I have to tell you that the admission was 20 cents.
20 cents.
And things were so rough during those days, people saved up 20 cents to go hear our band. Then we had the college bands. The college bands, Alabama State Collegians, which became the Erskine Hawkins Orchestra,
Right.
and which became a place where I spent most of my life, the best years of my life, recording years. Then we had some bands from Florida A&M College. In other words, during those days, the college bands was a thing, because there was only, a kid didn't have to have a scholarship. All he could do is play. And play great and have a big name, you know, all over the South. And the next thing, the dean and everyone was writing and trying to get this guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you remember that Erskine Hawkins from the Alabama State Teachers College. Then, as we know where the Adley brothers came from, Florida A&M. Then we had further up north, we had the Duke Blue Devils. Now you know who they were. That was Les Brown.
Right.
Yeah. And then we had Kay Kaiser from the University of North Carolina.
Right.
In other words, having bands was the big thing in colleges during those days. I don't know now. I read Downbeat and different magazines, things like that, and I see where they're having college bands, contests and all that.
Right. They're more for concerts, not dancing, though.
What's that now?
They're more for concerts and not dancing.
Yeah, more, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what made you want to play the trumpet as a young boy?
It's a funny story. Made me, I always wanted to sing. And I used to go around singing and humming and going on, you know. So people called me Little Satch, you know.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, and you may not believe this, but they gave us some used instruments from the other high school across town. And I picked up a cornet, and you wouldn't believe that I started to play the first note that I ever played, and the first thing I ever played was When You're Smiling, and when I found out that I was playing When You're Smiling in 7 sharps. 7, that means push all the valves down. You understand what it means? See?
Right.
So I learned how to play that, then I learned how to play other songs, and then everyone called me Little Satch, and I was the big thing around Pensacola. But my mother insisted that I go to another fellow. The fellow I mentioned was named Tony Bruno, and he had been to New York. And one night he heard me play, and he said, "Why don't you come by my house one day?" And you won't believe this. He said, "Why don't you come by my house one day and come to the front door?" He said to me, during those days, he said, "Come to the front door, and my mother will let you in and bring your horn." He ushered me into that living room during those days and taught me to play the trumpet.
He was white. Is that
Yeah.
right? Yes.
So that's one of the ways. Now, there's several other stories there. I knew that during those days that Louis Armstrong was very popular with the ladies. You know, as he was. It's easy to keep up with Satch's age because he was born in 1900, and frankly, I wasn't too far behind him. I was born in 1915, and my father was what we would call a ragtime piano player. As a matter of fact, my father was the one who did the piano roll on There'll Be Some Changes Made, and his name was Bobby Johnson. He had a lot to do with me. Gave me my first horn, bought me my first good horn, a King trumpet. And he heard me play after I had joined the Erskine Organ Band, which I imagine you've heard. The million record seller we had was called Tippin' In.
Right.
And it's still great. I got $21 for it.
$21?
$21 from R.C. Victor. Some friends of mine, lawyers and people, have been trying to say that I should sue them. Well, for what? I had, you know what I mean?
You had the pleasure of the music anyway.
Yeah, I got a chance to
Right.
to do something that will be heard the rest of my life.
Now, I understand your mother owned a speakeasy or a restaurant.
My mother?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's true. That's the reason why I knew so many musicians. No, this was during the days of Prohibition. And each town, if, you know, like the high sheriff or whoever, if you could get into his pockets, you know what I mean, he would allow one speakeasy on a certain side of town. And we had just this one. I lived on the east side of Pensacola, but sometimes I don't particularly care too much about it. But Pensacola, I could say, that wasn't a Jim Crow town. It was like I lived. To be frank with you, I came up in an exclusive white neighborhood. But we ran a speakeasy that had all kind of clientele, you know. And we got away with it. But when the Volstead Act came along, that was prohibition. You know, President Roosevelt. We tried to get a liquor license and we couldn't get it, and we found ourselves in New York. Now, the way this happened, maybe you've heard of a famous clarinet player named Edmund Hall.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was in the Benny Goodman. He was in the Benny Goodman story with Louis Armstrong Band. As a matter of fact, he was one of the ones who taught me how to play and how to act and all that kind of stuff. So I always wanted to be a singer and a trumpet player. They used to, at 12 o'clock every day all over the country, there was a band called the Claude Hopkins Orchestra. And they came from the Rosen Ballroom at 12 o'clock. Now, this was during the days when they didn't have that many radio stations, you know, like ABC, CBS, NBC, and you could hear the Claude Hopkins Band, and this guy would say, it's 12 noon on Broadway. And then you would hear Ovie Austin saying, I was swimming the ocean wide, I was sitting that great big wide, and man, I used to go crazy. I said, this has got to be me one of the days.
And they were probably playing live then too, right?
Huh?
This wasn't a record you were hearing. This was
This was
a real band.
This was Claude Hopkins Orchestra, which was supposed to be like against Duke Ellington's band. As a matter of fact, the Roseland Ballroom, what I say, was one of the best jobs in the country, and it's still running. I hope I'm not giving them a big plug, but the Roseland Ballroom is still alive on 52nd Street. Then one day, I think my mother came up to New York vacationing, and she blurts out that her son was the greatest trumpet player in the world.
Better than Satchmo.
Better than Satchmo. So anyway, Edmund Hall said, really? So anyway, they sent for me to come up here. The bus fare was $15 from Pensacola, Florida, New York. It came, and when it came, for some reason, I didn't get the job. I've been trying to search myself. I've played with him a couple of times, but I think there was another trumpet player named Louis Bacon that used to sing with Louis Armstrong. He was a ballad singer with Louis Armstrong. He got the job, but the next thing I wound up with one of the greatest bands in the country, and I said this, and God bless this man. He's still alive. He's 97 years old, but I was with the great Benny Carter Band of 1941, and I guess you know, you've heard those records that was maybe 20, 25 years ahead of the time.
Absolutely.
We recorded I Surrender Dear with him on trumpet. As a matter of fact, Benny was one of the great trumpet, and is now, is one of the great trumpet players of our time. He taught me a lot of things about, I remember I fought playing a little flat, you know. And when I joined the band, he told me to my face, he said, you play a little flat. He said, I'll straighten that out. And gave me a trumpet lesson. Then that was it. And you know, I haven't seen this man in many, many years. Incidentally, I know all these things like this because I'll tell you, in 2 weeks, I will be 83 years old.
I noticed that.
I will be 83 years old, and one of the things I'm just a little sad right now because I knew Frank Sinatra, and not really. who knew Frankie?
Yeah.
But not really, but I'll tell you something. I haven't seen him but once in 50 years. Can you imagine
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
And I've been everywhere. Every place he went, we went, because, you know, the Erskine Hawkins Band, we went everywhere. Now,
Can I ask you about when you moved to New York, did you come with your mother? You came with your mother to New York?
yeah,
Yeah.
she left first.
Right. I understand you had some pretty famous neighbors across the way from
Oh,
your apartment.
yeah, you heard of my neighbors. Well, the great Charlie Parker lived directly across the street from us in the Dewey Square Hotel. And every night he practiced, you know, scales and so. And one night my mother said, you know, I'll really be glad when that guy learned how to play that thing. So my Bill, what's his name, Dick Wilson from the Andy Cook. The whole Andy Cook Band lived in a hotel called the Dewey Square Hotel. That was directly called at 117th Street. As a matter of fact, I took some of the musicians from here, and we paused in front of Bird's Run, and I told him, I said, that was Bird's Nest. And Charlie, he and I, we weren't that great of friends, but I was with Charlie Parker when he worked at the Hollywood Cafe on 116th Street. Now, I could sit and tell you some stories about how many jazz musicians that came up between 110th and 125th Street. On 116th Street, where I came up in Harlem, I was about 21, 22 years old. I would say that they had about 8 or 10 nightclubs with bands on 116th Street. And even Charlie, even they'd have cutting contests, you know what I mean? And during those days, they would always try to cut Charlie, you know. I remember I remember there was a saxophone player named Horse Collar, they called him. And he'd be sitting there with his saxophone around his neck, and he said, I'm waiting for him. I'm waiting. And this went on, cost a quarter to get in, and this was the Hollywood Cafe on 116th Street and Lenox Avenue. And nowadays, I don't think there's hardly anything like that happen. But then Charlie and I joined a band. We joined the band together out in Queens, a show band. Now, maybe we would have a little time, but I don't know that much about Charlie Parker, but I do know one funny story. We had 8-piece band and Cam Williams and his orchestra, and we played for these chorus girls at this place called Ryan's out in Queens. So we got our meal. We got one meal a night. So one night, we were supposed to be at 6 o'clock, and one night old man Ryan he'd look out and see who was punching the clock. One night, Charlie Parker broke a record of it. I don't think this story's ever been told. He broke a record of it coming late. He rang the bell at 12 o'clock. And old man Ryan said, now who is that? And look, that was Charlie Parker. Then from then on, maybe it was cause of whatever happened to him, you know what I mean? But he was a wonderful man, that's all I can say.
You had to start work at 6. At Ryan's, you started at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
How late did you have to play then?
Well, during those days, when you say how late did you have to play, there wasn't any unions, there wasn't any days off. there wasn't any vacation. When I first came to New York, there wasn't any vacations. There wasn't any unions or anything like that. As a matter of fact, I marched for the day off. I marched for unions. And at that particular time, 802 was always, it wasn't segregated, but it was like uptown, downtown, you know. The majority of the black musicians hung out at a place called the Rhythm Club downtown, and the white musicians were on the floor. The floor was, but for just one reason, I hung out downtown. And I would say, since I'm interviewing you, I would say that if you look it up in some of the look-up books, and I have the pictures and everything, I was with one of the first integrated bands in the country. The first one was, as I think you have to look in your books, jazz books. The first one was by fine band leader called Boyd Rayburn. Maybe you've heard of him, saxophone player. The next band was organized by one of Benny Goodman's saxophone player called Jerry Jerome, and he's still living. God rest him.
Yes, he is.
He's almost 90 years old. He's living in the South somewhere. But myself, John Simmons on bass, I can't think of the piano player's name, and Arthur Herbert on drums. We were the first band, integrated band to play at Kelly Stables on 52nd Street. And one night, great pianist named Nat Jaffe said, "Hey, man," said, "this is one heck of a band. Why don't we keep this thing together?" And we kept it together until everybody went their own ways. And I've tried to find out whatever happened to Nat Jaffe, but I think he must have passed away, I think, way back in the 40s. And you see, when you talk about the 40s and 50s, sometimes you have to bring in subjects like racial segregation and things like that, which is, you try to stay away from that, even in conversation, because we've solved some of our problems. You know what I mean? And this is still the greatest country in the world, but we've solved most of our social problems, and maybe I'm happy to have gone through them. You know what I mean? We've been thrown out of different places and segregated, especially during the time of the Benny Carter Band. We went on tour, and this was in 1941, and this was one of the great bands with the Parrish Brothers, myself, Lincoln Mills. Most all of them are dead. I think maybe the sad part of my life would be that most of all of my friends have passed away. The Erskine Hawkins Band, they're all gone. There's only 1, 2, 3, about 4 of us left. Johnny Grimes, great trumpet player. Dolores Brown, one of us singers. Then, you know, Erskine passed away about 3 years ago himself. And Jimmy Harris, trumpet player, fine trumpet player. And all of the Count Basie Band, all of the Duke Ellington Band. And most of them are gone. Most of us left this planet. They've left me here. Maybe I could sometimes I could tell a lot of lies. I could tell a lot of lies if I wanted to.
Right.
But I'd like to tell things that actually
Right.
really happened
Was there
to them.
Was there certain parts of the country that were worse than others as far as the race?
Well, when you say worse than the others, most people would say that Mississippi was the worst place in the world to be on any planet, but not really. It was 4 or 5 states that had awful, what we call Jim Crow laws. But a lot of people could survive. I have been insulted when I was young, when I was a young fella, but I survived because my mother used to tell me all the time, says, just get along with people and everything will come all right, because naturally she never wanted anything to happen to me. I've seen some awful things happen to people in the South, but it was just a part of our country of growing up. You know what I mean? It was a part of our country of being what we are today. And maybe, I couldn't say it was for the best, but I can say that everything's going to be all right. It's going to be better, you know? And one of the main things that I like to see was, like I told you, I was one of the first ones to like, they used to say, whatever happened to Bobby? And people would say, oh man, he's downtown playing with the white boys. Well, that was true. But nowadays, that even a saying like that is passé. People don't even say it like that. If you're good enough to play with anyone, you can play with, and like in colleges and different things like that, social circles, you know, and nowadays, if a musician is talented, he can play with anyone, you know.
Right.
And I like to see. I have had several seminars with college kids, you know, and I have never actually felt either one was any other different color than mine, other than playing. And that's what I wanted to see. As you know, the University of Florida, down in Gainesville, they had great bands down there. And the University of Florida, A&M, that's where the Adderley brothers came from. Yes. We introduced them. The Erskine Hawkins band. Could I tell the story?
Please, because believe me, the Adderley brothers are my heroes.
Huh?
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah. Well, Nat and I, we did Orlando, Florida last year at Disneyland. He and I, 2 cornet players, trumpet players. But during one night in Orlando, Florida, these 2 little kids came up, Erskine, and the place was packed. And these 2 little kids had their horns. So one of them said, could we play some? Now, this was during the bebop days. This was during 1952. And we had Sonny Payne in the band. As a matter of fact, in the 50s, the Erskine Hawkins band went out of business. And that was the best that we've ever played together. But things had gotten worse economically and everything. So we said, okay, we'll let them play some. Man, these two kids, Cannon and the little cornet player, oh, they played. This was something to hear. And the next thing you know, they were on big time.
Right.
And there's a story out that they never had the audition. They never had to do anything. The story is that one night on Boston Road in the Bronx, Nancy Wilson was singing, and these two guys had a little gig probably paid $20, and someone from Capitol Record came in and heard them.
There you
They
go.
never looked back.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They both were very well educated. For Florida A&M, you know, has a great reputation scholastically. Alabama State. This is one good thing. This is one good thing about the southern colleges that have bands. The Alabama State Teachers College in Montgomery, the Tennessee State in Nashville, and then several other colleges. They've always had great bands and great musicians turn out, you know, like Dwight Mitchell and all those guys from Jacksonville, Edward Waters College. But maybe that is because of the fact that there's not that much work, you know, when you come out of school. If I told you when I was like maybe before I came up here, I was offered about maybe 10 scholarships, not anything other than playing the trumpet. And at Alabama State, that was a state college run by state money, tax money. We had to make our own breakfast. You understand?
Yeah.
I didn't attend there long because there was always, you know, there was always something better than that, you know. But I'm writing a book. I'd like to write a book about the southern colleges, southern bands that didn't really make it, and because in New York, if you came to New York, you were a New York musician. That's the reason why I came, you know. But bands like Don Albert, Johnson's Happy Pals, from Richmond, Virginia, and most all of those musicians came to New York and got with big bands, you know. And that's just about it. One of these days I'll finish it. I'll write the book. Maybe you'll finish it for me.
Maybe. I'd love to. I'd love to.
Okay.
Can you tell me how it came about that you joined Erskine Hawkins?
Oh, how John Erskine?
Yes.
Well, it's easy how John Erskine Hawkins. Erskine's band stayed with us when we had our hotel, or whatever you call it, you know.
In Pensacola.
In Pensacola. Some people have a different word for it, you know what I mean? Because there was always a lot of females around, you understand?
Yep.
A lot of booze and everything, and they stayed with us. So when I came to New York, they were on top. They had played the Savoy Ballroom, and I was with, maybe you haven't heard of this band, one of the great bands of our time. I was with the Don Redman Band on Broadway at the Cafe Zanzibar. And we closed one night, closed on a Sunday. And they had heard of me. They knew me when I was a kid. So I went out to get a paper. When I came back, my little wife, Dorothy, she said, Erskine Hawkins manager wanted to talk to you. Well, I said, about what? About what? He said he'd like for you to join his band. I said, nah, that's not me. So she said, well, you're not working. And she brought it home to me. She said, you're not working. Why don't you take your horn and get the buses going? At that particular time, bus fare, 8th Avenue bus fare was a nickel. So I got on the bus, 113th Street, got off at 142nd Street and heard this great band playing. And I went up, and that particular night, I think the draft board came up and took 3. It took the late and great Mr. Renald Jones, took Jimmy Harris, took about 5 of them. So that left the trumpet section empty. Then when I told Erskine, I laid it on the line. I said, I don't play lead trumpet. I'm a trumpet soloist. So he said, we knew you when you was a kid. We know who you are. So I played. Then maybe you've heard, one of our great trumpet players of our time was named Dud Bascom. He was the one who made that trumpet solo on Tuxedo Junction with the Erskine Hawkins Band. So I stayed for a week, and the Savoy Ballroom, the money was the scale, I think, was only like $39 or something like that. You know, so I stayed, and the guys began to like me. And as you know, Erskine Band never integrated. We never had. We never, and that is one of the things that really hurt me. We've never had any people of color in that band, but I stayed with them 12 years. But I'm glad I did, because I will say that I got a chance to record. Erskine always had a trumpet soloist. And I would say that if you came by my house, I could say that I recorded more trumpet solos with another trumpet player, with another great trumpet player's band than anyone. And I don't regret it at all. That one of the ways I knew them from the South. They like Southern musicians. I don't think we've ever had a Southerner in the band. The only one, the Southerner, was maybe Kelly Martin, our drummer, that was with Errol Garner later on in life. But I stayed with him for a long time, and he paid me very well. Erskine did. I did all right with that band.
Can you tell me about that recording session that you did tipping in? You tell me about the recording session.
Enjoy the session?
The recording session where you did tipping in with the mute.
Well, how this came about, we had rehearsed tipping in. That was written by Bobby Smith. We had re-rehearsed it in Boston. And at that particular time, the union was on strike. But we da-da-da-da-da-da-da, which had like a wartime flavor. So we were supposed to come to New York, but they told us instead of coming to New York, since we was already out west, to go to RCA Victor out by the stockyards in Chicago. So about 5 below zero, I think, that morning, we went, and we'd all been drinking that night for some reason. I don't know why. We'd all been drinking that night. And so we said, well, let's try that tipping in. And we played it first. And we went down, and during those days, it was before tape. It was on the disc. The more we played it, the worse we got. So one of the A&R man, I think, was Russ Case, fine trumpet player. He was R.C. Victor's A&R man. So let's go back and try the first one. So while I was going to the mic, I dropped my cup mute, and he threw me what we call I can't think of them.
Harmon?
Harmon mute.
Harmon
That's it. You know better than I do. Harmon mute, and when it got to my solo, the guy said down low, and a million, I'd say 2 million records came from that, and $21 for me.
So you could buy your own Harmon mute,
Yeah,
right?
I could buy my own Harmon mute. Now that the story is, that is where the Miles Davis sound came from. It doesn't have to be true.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like for it maybe to be true, because Miles, as you know, Miles took my place with the Benny Carter Band.
I didn't know that.
Don't know, a lot of people didn't know it. The morning that Benny left to go to Hollywood to do that movie, one of the big movies, I can't think of the lady's name, but anyway, he got his break, and he went, and Miles was just a kid from East St. Louis, and he was downstairs waiting to see Benny then. Benny took him out west with him, and then I joined after that. I'm trying to think. When I go back, then I joined Erskine Hawkins. That's when after that.
Okay.
I wasn't too particular about joining Erskine Hawkins. I'll tell you, the bands that I liked, and I never really got a chance to play with them too much. I liked the Don Redman band. I thought the Don Redman band was like perfect almost, like, you know, because you know with Taft Jordan,
Yeah.
Dick Vance, and all those great trumpet players, you know.
Plus, he was Don
and-
Redman was a great arranger too, right?
Yeah, you know, and Don, you know, some nowadays. So you hear some of his stuff nowadays. Chant of the Weeds. Have you ever heard that tune?
I guess not.
The Chant of the Weed. That was his theme song.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the Chant of the Weed and all that kind of stuff. Nowadays, then I was a singer, you know, like I told you, and during those days. Before I go any further, I have to tell you this. I wrote all this stuff out 2 days ago, and I left it at home, and I was coming out here today. For some reason, I don't know.
That's all right.
But during those days, Don had a song called "I Heard." Yes, I heard. It wasn't told to me. I only heard. And when he found out I was a singer, then that's when he wanted me to join his band. But like I told you before, if I had some advice to give a young trumpet player nowadays, I would learn to play the trumpet and sing. Because frankly, I'll tell you, I haven't been doing well. I'm a little crippled now, you know. I don't know what's wrong with my knees. I don't run as fast as I did, you know. But if I was going to give a young musician any kind of advice, I'd tell him to take voice lesson, because I'll tell you something. Nowadays, even in this hotel, I worked in this hotel and made good money in this, where we are now, because I was a trumpet player singer.
Mm-hmm.
And most trumpet players, singers, even Harry James sang. But who started was my good friend Satch and Bunny Berrigan.
Uh-huh.
And I always said this about Bunny. Bunny is the one who put bad singers on the map. I Can't Get Started With You was one of what was his great singer, and Satch was great, you know,
Right.
good singer, but Bunny sang out of tune. But everybody, I've been around the world, and I played. The minute any cafe owner see me with my horn, the first thing he says, "Oh, you're gonna sing a few tunes too, huh?" That means that the girl singer is out. You understand what I mean?
Yeah, sure. You make yourself more
Yeah,
valuable
that
too.
means that one Sarah is out.
I
you know,
get you.
During those days.
Right.
Now, anything else would you like to know?
Yes, I would love to know about getting a visit. You said King Oliver visited
Okay.
your.
Well, like I said, during those days, when the bands would come from New Orleans, like Pop Celestine, Don Albert, King Oliver, another band from Chicago. See, bands that was based in Chicago, they all came from New Orleans. See, but that was their hometown, and they'd say, and people would say, "Hey, why don't you let the kid play some?" You know, why don't you let the kid play some? And said, even during those days you sang, and this was before microphones or anything. This was during the days when we used to sing Rudy Valley with a megaphone, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, we used to pass the Mickey.
Pass the Mickey?
Pass the
Oh.
Mickey. That was the megaphone. And then all of a sudden, one night, they put up this megaphone, and we played. And in my career, I could say, starting with early one morning at Decca Records in 1953, with all this stuff, I saw it all happen. I saw the first wire recorder, first time on tape, the first time anything that, well, naturally, I'm 83 years old. And every time we went, now you got to remember that we were with RCA Victor for many years. Urson's band was with RCA Victor for 10. We saw the disc, well, you know, taking it off on disc. And what I really can't understand, some of the songs like the Tom and Dorsey Band, Otis Shaw, Duke Ellington, and even Benny Carter, we did on disc, and some of the qualities of these records are the same quality with all this stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With all the electronics and all that, and we never had all that stuff. Like we had, I'll tell you what, Tippington had 2 mics. Out front for the trumpet and for the piano.
Wow.
That's it. And if you play that record nowadays, you will know the top. Look at all of that great stuff that Duke Ellington did over to RCA Victor. There wasn't any big microphones, and each trumpet. I remember one morning we went in to Decca, and Sonny Payne, they had such problems recording him until they even turned the drums backwards to get a tune. I can't think of the name of the tune. The next thing we went in, the engineer said, "Give us all you got, everything you got." And this was after then we went with King Records, and every time we went in, there was always something new about, you know, electronics and stuff like that.
Well, the bands knew how to balance themselves, didn't they?
Yeah.
You know, from playing live all that time.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
I guess so. I think that maybe some of the A&R men or people who, some of the engineers, I think that maybe they knew more about sound than the electronic sound, because the electronic does it all for himself. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
But some of the guys we've had, I can't think of the electronic men. The only one that I can think of that gave us a couple of hits was a trumpet player named Russ Case. He had left. He had left one of the. He had left one of the places to come and record with them, you know. But nowadays, look at all this stuff. They got 4 or 5. I don't even know the name of these things. Look at this.
Right.
You understand? Microphone.
I wanted to ask you another question about the early days. Did you ever play something what they call jitney dances?
Who?
Jitney dances, where they'd have ropes up and people would come in and buy a ticket to dance.
Oh,
Is that what they called them? Perhaps they called them something different.
jitney dance. Oh,
Yeah.
Well, a jitney dance was like like a lot of people came in at low price. You know what I mean? We used to have, there were certain nights that they would have like 15, 20 cents, and you could hear Benny Carter, you could hear Fletcher Henderson for 25, called jitney dances, you know, and in New York, up and down Broadway, they had these jitney places that the girls would come in, and now it comes back to me. They used to have tickets. They have tickets, and you would give the girl maybe a quarter to dance with her so many times. There wasn't anything wrong about it. It was just that was just paying to have someone to dance with. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, they made a movie about it. You know, about people coming in with their tickets, and you'd give. And I heard that there's one still left on Broadway even now.
Wow.
Somewhere you're going, you give the ticket, and you dance. They call them jitney dances. You know.
When you were traveling on the road with Erskine Hawkins or any of the other bands, what was the hardest part of that, being on the road?
Being on the road?
Yeah.
Well, being on the road at that particular time, when I left Erskine, the Civil Rights Act, this was before Martin and several other things happened, but the Civil Rights Act had just become a reality in our country. There wasn't, some of the things, some of the violence hadn't started to happen, but people had begun to think for themselves, you know what I mean? Like it even started down south. And there were hotels that we couldn't go in, there were restaurants that we couldn't eat in, and things what they would call during those days that they would call Jim Crow in our society. But before Martin Luther King and President Johnson and other people saw things happening in our country, it wasn't that, it changed overnight, because if it hadn't, our country was doomed. You understand what I mean? You see what's happening in other countries nowadays. They don't even have a civil rights, and some of the what baffles me about some of the countries, most of the countries are of the same color.
Yeah.
But we had all kinds of different people of different races and everything that had to come together as one person. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, whether it was green, blue, yellow, white, or whatever. But it had to be that way, and this is not the end of it. You know, it's better. That's just now. This I can tell you about what year this started in. Around 1952. Now, in 1952, dances started, mixed dances started, and people started speaking up for themselves, for their rights. You understand what I mean? That's just the way it was. It had to be that way. You know. All right.
Something had to change.
Change.
I understand that you got to play with Milt Hinton in a group called the Survivors.
As a matter of fact, Milt Hinton?
Yes.
Well, I was with Cap Calloway with Milt Hinton. As a matter of fact, I have a tape. Would you like it?
Yes.
I have a tape with that was taken at one of the music schools. I won't give them a plug.
Yes.
But Arnie Lawrence, you've heard of him.
Yes, absolutely.
He got together a bunch of older guys like Panama Francis on drums, myself, Milt Hinton on bass, the great Clark Terry. Can you think of Clark Terry as an old man?
No, it's hard.
Clark Terry on trumpet. I'm trying, Red Richards, God rest his soul, he just passed away. Red Richards, then Eddie Bearfield, and we recorded. I'll give you one of the tapes.
Love to.
And this Milt Hinton is, I was with Milt Hinton when he was young with Cap Calloway, when the whole world was young, when I was with Cap Calloway back.
Yeah.
You've heard of Panama Francis.
Certainly.
He's sick now.
Yeah.
Then George Kelly,
Yeah.
great tenor player. I just saw him in Moscow on the Hudson. Did you see the movie?
Yes. Was
Yeah.
that him playing?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
darn.
He and I came up together as kids,
Oh.
in the South. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just saw him, and we never did think that we'd get this over, but God kept us here.
Yeah.
You know.
Of,
But
of all the leaders you've played with, Cab and Erskine Hawkins, was there one that was the strictest with you and the members of the band?
Benny Carter was a perfectionist, and he was someone to be looked up to because he was such a great musician. As a matter of fact, he was such a great trumpet player until all the trumpet players that ever worked with him looked up to him. He wasn't that strict, you know what I mean? I'm 83, Benny is about 90.
Yeah.
I would say around 90 years old. But I celebrated my 24th birthday in North Carolina with Benny. He treated me all right. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, I could say this for myself, and being from the South and being lucky, I always tried to do what was best for me to get along, you know, even to get along with myself. We had in some of the bands, we had what we call some actor uppers, you know,
Yeah.
guys who drank too much and all that.
Right.
But some of them, Benny, he, you know, he ran a tight ship musically, you know. I had something that happened to me on a boat ride about about 3 years ago. I was on a boat ride, and this guy came up to me, and he hummed these words, he hummed this song, and said, da 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 da. So I said, oh my God, why have I heard this? And I'm looking down in the Hudson River, and I said, pardon me, he was a banjo player in a Dixieland band.
Uh-huh.
I said, why'd you ever hear this song? He said, that was Benny Carter's opening number 48 years ago, named Pom Pom. He said to me, I could hum everything that Benny Carter ever played. And I wanted to see him and talk to him, but that was our way. And during those days now, you got to remember, we didn't have any microphones. When I was with the Benny Carter Band, we only used one mic. And I sang with that band too.
Mm-hmm.
I sang, Can't Get Started,
Uh-huh.
or whatever that was popular. And then we had the great Maxine Sullivan.
Yeah.
With then we had a singer called Roy Felton, and we made a couple of big hits. One was Vaughn Monroe's thing, There I've Said It Again.
Mm-hmm.
We made that popular. I could tell you a story of things that some of the bands made popular, that like I've said it again. Da, da, da. Roy Felton made that. We made that popular with the Benny Carter Band. Next thing I knew, Vaughn Monroe
Picked it up and did a cover
picked it up.
version.
And that,
Yeah, right.
it wasn't larceny, it was stealing. But
I understand you were singing on the radio when a very important announcement was made in 1945.
well, I never talk about it because people may say that right now I think about it tonight, and I can tell you the night that World War II ended,
Mhm.
it was ABC, and there were a lot of things happening. We were in the Hotel Lincoln. As you know, the Hotel Lincoln was the only one in New York that used black bands. Our band and Count Basie. As a matter of fact, our band and Count Basie, maybe Lionel Hampton, were the only bands that played the big hotels. The Hotel Lincoln, when I was with Erskine, we were the only band that played the Hotel Astor. We were the only black band that played the 400 Club on Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I don't know. But we knew that there was something happening, and we were in a rush to get back to the hotel because we got back and we took our seats, and the song that I sang, I wasn't really the boy singer with Erskine, but I did my part, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we were singing, Saturday night is the loneliest night in the week. And all of a sudden, a guy came out and waved his hand, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, World War II has ended.
Wow.
That hit us. And you know what, Dave, that is what changed the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they just cut me out, maybe, and we kept singing.
Uh-huh.
But I've tried to find out whether the Smithsonian, or maybe I've looked for it in my own way to try to find out exactly. I knew during those days we didn't have we had what we call V-disc,
Yes.
large records like that could take off 2 or 3 different, and you had to handle them with care because they would break just like regular. And I know it was taken off on a V-disc, but I don't think it was taken off like anything.
Like a radio wire
Yeah,
or something,
radio.
yeah.
I don't think it was taken off like that. But I think maybe during those days, the Smithsonian Institute would have a lot of things. I've tried to look for it, and I've said it. I've said, and maybe people said, "Oh, come on, you know."
Yeah.
So, but someone had to be said. This was at the Blue Room of the Hotel Lincoln.
All right.
Was the night World War II was over, and man, you've never seen people that you've seen that famous photo of the sailor
Yeah.
kissing the girl, and all that. Well, all that kind of stuff was happening, and then, sadly to say, that was the beginning of the end of the big band era.
Yeah.
That was the beginning of the end of the era, because when television came in the early 50s, that was the end of it. But I still do all right. I can't kick. I have a gig tomorrow night.
Well, you have. I understand we're going to do a little playing.
Yeah,
Shirley going to show us something.
Still
and-
playing.
So I want to thank you very much for your time, and we're going to go get set up in
Oh,
the next room.
good, great. And, thank you. Thank you
behalf
very
of the
much.
college and,
yeah. So we're going to play something later.
gonna play
maybe.
something.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.